Hannah Hale had always considered herself immune to fairy tales, the kind told by old aunts and whispered over childhood beds. But when she met Viktor Hale, she found herself drawn into one without realizing it. Viktor was a man who seemed to have stepped out of another century, tall, impeccably dressed, his accent faintly Eastern European, his voice deep enough to leave a shadow in the air. She met him in Florence at an art gallery, where he stood before a 17th century oil painting as though it were a mirror into his own past. He had an air of knowing more than he would ever say, and in the weeks that followed, his charm consumed her. Tiver. He spoke of his private estate in the mountains, an ancient castle in a quiet European countryside where the internet was unreliable, and the nearest neighbor miles away. When he invited her to visit after a whirlwind romance of 6 months, she accepted without hesitation, convinced she had found the man she had been waiting for her whole life. The drive to the castle was long and winding, the road flanked by bare winter trees, their skeletal branches scratching the air. The castle emerged from the mist like something carved from the earth itself, its stone walls dark, its turrets sharp against the gray sky. Inside, it was a curious mix of past and present, vast corridors lit by ornate chandeliers, yet dotted with subtle modern touches, a sleek coffee machine in the grand kitchen, a security keypad on a heavy oak door. Hannah felt the weight of its history the moment she stepped through the entrance. Viktor's staff, few in number and silent as shadows, moved with a rehearsed precision that made her uneasy. They never met her eyes for long, as though under some unspoken rule. For the first few days, everything was perfect. Viktor showed her the library, the music room, and the glass-walled conservatory filled with winter roses. At night, they dined by candlelight, and he would tell her old stories of his family's strange bloody tales about distant ancestors who were both revered and feared in the region. Hannah laughed them off at first, thinking them romantic embellishments. But each night, his eyes seemed darker when he told them. On the fourth night, he gave her a heavy keyring, each key different and ornate. "You may explore every part of the castle," he said, his tone gentle, but with a pause that felt deliberate. "Except one room, the one at the end of the east wing." He leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. "That one is mine alone." She felt a thrill, a ripple of curiosity, and promised she would respect his request. For a time, she kept that promise. She roamed the halls during the day, while Viktor attended to business calls in his study. She opened centuries-old cabinets, found faded love letters tucked in drawers, and traced her fingers along suits of armor that smelled faintly of dust and rust. But the forbidden door in the east wing called to her more each day. It was carved from blackened wood, with an iron lock that looked far older than the rest of the castle. Every time she passed it, she imagined what might be in priceless art, or some shameful family relic. Her thoughts turned restless at night, her dreams vivid and strange. One evening, after Viktor left for a sudden overnight trip to attend to a private matter, Hannah decided she could wait no longer. She crept through the dim east wing, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets, and slid the small unmarked iron key into the lock. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a sound like a sigh. The smell hit her before her eyes adjusted, a coppery, metallic temps inside. The room was dim, lit only by narrow windows covered in cobwebs. The walls were lined with canvases, but these were not landscapes or portraits. They were grotesque, disturbingly lifelike paintings of women, each in some stage of terror or agony. Their faces were so vivid they seemed to breathe. In the center of the room stood 3 mannequins wearing dresses, modern ones she recognized from Viktor's wardrobe for her, ones she had worn herself. On the floor nearby lay a fresh canvas, unfinished, showing a woman's face half-painted, and unmistakably hers. Her knees went weak. Then she noticed something else against the far wall, a row of tall, narrow cabinets. She opened one before she could stop herself. Inside was not a mannequin, but a preserved body, a woman in an evening gown, her eyes glassy, her skin waxy but real. Hannah stumbled back, her hand over her mouth. There were more cabinets, and she knew without opening them that they held the same horrors. A sound made her freeze, the faint click of a lock turning behind her. Viktor stood in the doorway, his expression calm, but his eyes like knives. "I told you, Hannah," he said softly, stepping inside. "Some doors are not meant to be opened." She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. He took a step closer. "You're not the first to think the rules don't apply. But unlike the others, you had my heart. I had almost hoped you wouldn't betray my trust." He reached into his coat and withdrew a long narrow blade that glinted in the dying light. Hannah bolted, shoving past him and running down the east wing, her pulse a roar in her ears. She knew she could never outmatch his speed for long, but adrenaline carried her. She fled into the library, knocking over a table to slow him down, then darted into the main hall. Outside, the winter wind howled, rattling the windows. She tried to find the front door, but the castle's layout twisted in her mind. Every corridor, longer and darker than she remembered. His footsteps echoed closer. She reached the grand staircase. and looked up to see two figures, Victor's housekeeper and groundsman, blocking the way, their faces pale but expressionless. Asterisk, they stepped aside just enough for Victor to pass between them like a predator claiming his prey. But then, in a moment Hannah would later think of as pure miracle, the housekeeper glanced at her and whispered something in a language she didn't know, then subtly pointed toward a side corridor. Asterisk, Hannah took it without hesitation, running toward what turned out to be a service door. She burst into the freezing night air, her breath burning her lungs, and sprinted across the courtyard toward the gates. Behind her, Victor's voice rang out, not shouting, but low and certain. "You can run, Hannah, but I always finish what I start." She didn't stop until she reached the narrow road, where a passing truck nearly hit her. The driver, a grizzled man, pulled her aboard without question when he saw her face. Asterisk, she looked back once, and in the distance, the castle loomed, a black silhouette against the pale moon, one light burning in the east wing. She knew she had escaped with her life, but not her nightmares. For months afterward, she read every scrap of history about the Hale family she could find. The records were vague, but there were mentions of wives who had vanished, of portraits that had disappeared from galleries under mysterious circumstances. Asterisk, she never returned to the countryside, but in quiet moments she swore she could feel eyes on her as eyes, and in her dreams, she was always back in that room, standing before the half-finished painting of her own terrified face.